Welcome back, everybody, to our second week of G5 conference previews. This is the G5 Beat. I'm Josh. This week we are previewing the American Athletic Conference, and my partners in crime, as usual, are Mr. John Duncan and Baker Loy. What's going on, fellas?
What's up, guys? Y'all ready to talk some hashtag P6 tonight?
Okay, if we're going to do that, I'm done. I'm done.
Oh, Baker, you doing all right, man?
Doing good. But yeah, we don't play that game, baby. We can't do it.
There we go.
No.
There we go. Well, all right, guys. I guess I'll get it started with this. Again, we're going to try to go alphabetical order like we did last week in our Sunbelt preview. So I'm going to start off with the Cincinnati Bearcats, the defending American Conference champions from last year, and the team that really was, in my opinion, deserving of trying to get into that playoff. And it's unfortunate we didn't have a 12-team playoff last year because they definitely would have gotten in, and we could have got Coastal in too. But last year, everybody knows, finished the season 9-1, 6-0 in the AAC, winning the championship over Tulsa, losing to a really good Georgia team in the Peach Bowl, 24-21. But we'll just say Cincinnati really didn't want to be in that Peach Bowl, to be honest. So that's why they lost. And all jokes aside, the Bearcats proved that they belonged on the big stage. They pretty much led the whole game up until the end when Georgia won 24-21. But this year, Cincinnati, they're going to be a favorite, to get the New Year's Six game again this year, and hopefully maybe even have a shot at the playoff. And this year, they've definitely got a harder schedule, which we'll get into later on. This is Luke Fickell's 5th year in Cincinnati, killing it in the recruiting game. Right now, they have the number 1 recruiting class in 2021 of the American Conference, according to 247 Sports. We'll start on the offensive side of the ball. Last year, they averaged a little over 450 yards per game, 212 on the ground, and 238 in the air, averaging about 37.5 points per game last year. Of course, this offense is led by Desmond Ridder. Out of 281 pass attempts, he completed 186 for over 2,200 yards, 19 touchdowns, and only 6 interceptions. The reigning American Conference Player of the Year on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, and you even look at the rushing yards. Now, keep in mind, in college, everybody should know, but sacks are taken into account on your rushing attempts and rushing yards. But he still had almost 600 rushing yards and 12 rushing touchdowns last year. So just a threat, not only throwing the ball, but also running the ball. And definitely, he came back this year. He's probably, if he, goes to the NFL draft after this year, he's, in my opinion, definitely going to be a first-round guy. I don't know where in the first round. He does have some things that he does need to improve on, though. But right behind him, you've got Evan Prater, who, he's a backup to Ridder, but he was also a Mr. Ohio player in high school. So got a little competition. I mean, it's Ridder's job, but it's great to have that young freshman pushing Ridder to do better, which he should this year. On the offensive side of the ball, they do return 7 starters for the 2021 season. Running back, Josh, you should know, former Alabama transfer Jerome Ford is back again this year. Last year had 73 rushes for 483 yards and 8 touchdowns. They lose Jared Dokes, who was the leading rusher, but having Jerome Ford back is going to help out the rushing attack. And also, don't forget about Charles McClelland, a sophomore, only had 22 touches last year, but 115 yards. Wide receiver, they lose their tight ends. They don't lose their tight ends. I'm sorry. Josh Wiley is back, a sophomore who actually led the team with 28 receptions for over 353 yards and 6 touchdowns, and he was second team AAC last year. We know Luke Fickell loves his tight ends, so he's definitely going to use Wiley and the others. Alec Pierce should be back at full health this year, hopefully, in the wide wide receiver position. They do lose wide receiver Ja'Shawn Jackson and their other tight end, Bruno LaBelle. But overall, the unit should be better as a whole in regards to the wide receiver unit. Offensive line, you lose a tough loss. You lose first team all AAC left tackle James Hudson, right tackle Darius Harper, and center Jakari Robinson. But you do have 6 guys on the offensive line that actually do have some starting experience that return this year. They also add Stony Brook transfer James Tunstall, who was first team FCS in the 2019 season. So the O-line, you lose a couple guys, but you add that transfer and you have that experience, starting experience. So they should be about the same as last year. I definitely don't look for them to take a huge step back from their production from last year, even though they lose those 3 guys as mentioned earlier. On the defensive side of the ball, last year the Bearcats gave up 324 yards per game, 111 on the ground, and about 213, 214 through the air. A stat that I found very interesting from the Athlon Preview magazine was that the Cincinnati defense allowed a touchdown on just 13.95% on opponent drives last year, and that was the best in the American Conference and 3rd nationally. Luke Fickell, he's going to have a good defense again this year, even though they do lose their defensive coordinator, Marcus Freeman, to Notre Dame, and we'll get into Notre Dame a little later too. But they're going to have another good defense again this year. You've got 7 starters back this year on the defensive side of the ball. Mike Tressel is going to be the defensive coordinator, coming from Michigan State. The defensive line of the Bearcats, best in the country. I mean, it's definitely best in the G5, but I would argue that it is one of the best defensive lines in the country, even compared to some of those SEC defensive lines that you hear all the media talking about. But this defensive line is legit. Phil still mentions in his preview that it looks like they are going to switch to a more 3-4 front this year under Mike Tressel. Unfortunately, they do lose their defensive end, Elijah Ponder and Ethan Tuckey, but they do add a P5 transfer from Virginia, Jawan Briggs. Majai Sanders is back. He had 7 sacks last year, along with 31 tackles and 3.5 tackles for loss. Also, Sanders is going to be going for the single-season sack record at Cincinnati this year in program history, so hopefully he can get that. The defensive line bring back defensive end Jabari Taylor and Malik Van, so just really deep on that defensive line. In regards to the linebackers, the Bearcats lose Darrell White, who was their leading tackler and first team all AAC, 77 tackles and 3 sacks last year. In the secondary, you lose Derek Forrest, who was the top tackler in the secondary, of 40 tackles and 2 interceptions last year, and also lose James Wiggins. But they returned the great cornerback duo with Ahmad Gardner and Kobe Bryant. So definitely one of the best defensive back groups in the nation to go with that great defensive front. So that's enough talk. Let's look at the schedule. Right now, the over-under, according to what we're using, the ESPN.com, they have the over-under for Cincinnati's win total set at 10 games. You look at the schedule, the non-conference is a lot tougher this year than it was last year. Cincinnati is scheduled to go to Indiana September 18th. Now, Indiana, back in the day, that was normally a pretty good P5 game to get because, it was a very winnable P5 game for a G5 team. But Indiana had a hell of a season last year, and they expect to do big things again in the Big Ten this year. So if Cincinnati can knock off a top 20 Indiana team and have them, do well again this year, and even after that game continue and have a good record, that's going to help bolster Cincinnati's resume even greater, to have a shot at getting into the playoff. But not just Indiana, another opponent at Notre Dame on October 2nd. I mean, that's going to be another at least top 20 opponent for the Cincinnati Bearcats. So that's 2 right there. Hopefully you get them in the top 15, and you need, if you're a Bearcat fan, you need both of those teams to do well for the remainder of the season after those games that you play. And you got to win, you got to win. Toughest conference game is going to be that home game against UCF on October 16th. That's probably going to be one of the deciders on who gets to the conference championship, or it could be both, but we'll get into that later. I am actually going over the 10 wins. I'm very confident in this Cincinnati Bearcat squad this year, and I do think that they will get – I hope that they can get Indiana and Notre Dame, but I do think that they'll get at least one of those wins over Indiana and Notre Dame. Guys, any thoughts on Cincinnati? Or
first and foremost, I have to ask, did you say that they have a defensive back named Kobe Bryant?
Kobe Bryant, yes. It's just like Kobe Bryant, yes, except it's spelled with a C instead of a K, yes.
Okay, all right. So is his are his ball skills on the football field just like Kobe's J on the basketball court?
Hey, 4 interceptions last year, man. So he's right. Good. He's a good guy to watch.
Not to get too corny there. That's awesome.
Nah. Well, Josh, I'll kick it over to you for some ECU Pirate action.
You will not. That's me.
Oh, Baker's got the Pirates. Yeah, there you go.
No worries, sir. But yeah, we roll on down to Pirate Country down in North Carolina, where we hoist the colors in Greenville. Let me just say, first and foremost, if you have not made that trip to Greenville before, it's a must watch. Their tailgating scene it's quite impressive. They know how to get down in Greenville. But focusing on the team here, going to their offense, we're in the third year of Mike Houston here, and they're definitely looking to try to make a bowl this year. They're returning 10 starters on an offense that was 8th best in the AAC in 2020. They really hung their hat on the ground game. They were the number 1 rushing team in the conference last year, averaging 217.1 yards per game. 10th in passing, so they really struggled there, 176.7 yards per game, but 4th overall in points per game at 34.7, so at least not bad there. Their running game kind of held up their end of the bargain and really pulled them through. Running back Rajay Harris and wide receiver Tyler Snead are both preseason Athlon second team all conference, so look for them to lead the way on the offense. Quarterback Holton Allers averaged the 3rd most passing yards per game in the conference in 2020 at 240.1 yards per game. He also threw for 18 touchdown passes, so it's respectable there from him. Sophomore wide receiver CJ Johnson, and by the way, he was 3rd in the conference as far as returners. I know you said a second ago you said 10th in passing yards per game in the conference. Well, this guy's 3rd as far as production of the quarterbacks coming back, just to clarify that. Sophomore wide receiver CJ Johnson is expected to play a big role in 2021 after leading the team with 6 touchdown receptions in 2020 and finishing with 21.3 yards per reception, earning him freshman All-American honors. If you got a guy that can get you 20 yards a play, that's a pretty stout receiver right there. So I'd look for him to make a big impact this year and continue to improve. ECU hopes to get Oklahoma transfer tight end Ryan Jones back from suspension. He transferred in earlier this offseason and has had a little off-the-field issue there. But if he does, in fact, return, there are some expectations that they may actually go to a dual tight end package with he and Shane Calhoun in hopes that they can continue to increase their run production there and also maybe flank a couple of them out for some passes as well. The offensive line's a veteran group that's been decent. They're not like over the top, but definitely good enough, as you could see, paving the way for that run game. As far as defensively, they're returning 11 starters. Yes, you heard that right, 11 starters. So they will be there on defense all day with experience. Now, with that said, their defense wasn't, perfect, but it was still okay. It was the 5th-ranked defense in 2020 in the conference, 4th best scoring defense, and the 2nd best rushing defense, 9th best pass defense. So overall, again, they don't let teams score a lot. They can hold the run. If you're passing against them, though, that's where they've been exposed. linebacker Xavier Smith and corner Jaquan McMillan are preseason Athlon second team All-American players there. So they're probably looking to lead the way there. Defensive lineman Rick Diabreu is preseason third team All-Conference as well. ECU is looking for some other folks to step up on that defensive line besides Abreu. He's kind of been a one-trick pony right now, so they're looking for a little bit more of a pass rush there. Some potential impact transfers on the defense are inside linebacker Jacoby Simpson and safety DJ Ford. Jacoby Simpson comes via TCU, and DJ Ford is coming across the state from North Carolina, Chapel Hill there. Secondary is probably the strongest position group on the Pirates defense right now heading into this year, as far as at least my opinion. So look for them to hopefully turn it on there and continue to produce. Special teams, I do just want to point out real quick that returner Tyler Sneed did earn 2 preseason all-conference nods for Athlon there. Second team all-conference kick returner and third team all-conference punt returner. So the guy does it both ways, and he's being recognized that twice. ECU's a team, when I look at them, they've got a lot of experience, and Coach Mike Houston knows that he needs to make a bowl this year, being his third season, or else he's definitely going to start feeling a little bit of the hot seat. They do have a tough non-conference schedule when you look at them. They've got to go play App State and Charlotte, my Mountaineers there. And, that's a really big one, I think, because ECU really has held their own and really taken their end of that rivalry game almost every time here of late, and they want to continue that. But right now, a lot of folks would favor App State, and ECU doesn't want it to be that way. They want to hold those recruiting grounds. And after that game, they're going to get Marshall a couple weeks later. They're also going to get South Carolina. So all 3 of those will be really tough non-conference opponents. They've got to go to Marshall. They actually get South Carolina in a, as we call it, hashtag G5 versus P5 matchup coming to Greenville, coming to Dowdy-Ficklin. So that'll be a big one, having an SEC team come to town there, and they're hoping to pull off the big upset there. As far as the over/under goes, I actually have them going over the ESPN over/under. 4.5 was the over/under set there, but I do think that they can get over. I look at that schedule, and I'd like to say that there is a possibility that they could win 2 non-conference games. I'm not saying that they're going to do it, but they should definitely beat Charleston Southern, and it'll be interesting to see what they do against App, South Carolina, and Marshall. Additionally, they've got to win 3 more, obviously, at that point in conference, and I think it's doable. They've got some tough games. They do have to go to UCF and go to Houston. They also are going to Memphis and Navy, and those could be tough places to play, but doable. They get Cincinnati at home, so we'll see what they do. I think UCF and Houston, those will be a struggle. Cincinnati a struggle, but the others, I think they're all really winnable games. So yeah, we'll go from there and see how the Pirates do this year.
And definitely though, looking at those first 3 games, Baker, if they somehow go 0-3 out of there, I pretty much think the season's over. I mean, that's just such a brutal start to the App State. Then you got South Carolina, a P5 team, and then you got to go to Huntington to take on Marshall. I mean, that's a tough. And if you start the season 0-3, their Pirate fans are definitely going to be upset and probably start barking for change. Because Mike Houston came in with such high expectations. He was at James Madison before, who was, still is really a powerhouse on the FCS level, but just can't seem to get things going. And it's so frustrating. You mentioned early on, when you started talking about ECU, but Greenville, Dowdy-Ficklin Stadium, I haven't been there, but that fan base, and they still are very passionate. But I remember back in the Conference USA days, I mean, ECU was dominating. I mean, they were, beating P5 teams. They were beating teams like South Carolina. They were beating Miami. They were just dominating Conference USA. It's just really frustrating for their fan base to see where they're at. And even if you look at the recruiting rankings now, they're not even recruiting very well. But right now they're ranked 8 in the AAC on the 2021 class. So just would love to see, Pirates get things turned around.
Absolutely. And also,
and
to your point, John, like, if you start off the season 0-3, it ain't like you have chances later on at the end of the season to get some wins. I mean, you end with at Memphis, at Navy, and Cincinnati.
Right.
Yeah. So those first 3 games would be critical for them.
Yeah, they've got to go at least 1 and 2 out of there, I think.
Yeah, and I'll say this, look, I mean, they used to pack that stadium, and now it really has turned into more of a, let's tailgate our tails off and then let's go home and maybe watch the game on TV. And you do want to get that atmosphere back rolling in Greenville in the stadium, and it can be that in a heartbeat. They just got to get winning again. And I'll tell you this, you look at that 3-game stretch at the beginning of the season, I know for a fact I've seen, some ECU fans talk about this. They have notoriously struggled the last few years at the beginning of the season. They've gotten off to slow starts. Yep. And that could be what you see again this year with that schedule. So in a way, I look at that and say, okay, it could be the nail in the coffin. But at the same time, I see it as, well, they faced that early season adversity here the past few seasons. They've got some players who are used to it, so maybe they can overcome it. In a way, it helps them that they have faced that adversity. But I agree, as a fan base, you're going to be really frustrated if Mike Houston does start off 0-3 again. So let's see what they can do, and hopefully they can, really get off to a better kick there.
And one last thing. ECU has not been to a bowl game since 2014. So, yeah.
Well, all right. Well, I think we're heading to Memphis, right?
Oh, wait, no, we got to go to Houston first.
Oh, sorry. So, I don't know my ABCs. Sorry. Apologies.
No worries. So, all right, the Houston Cougars. Now, when you look at Houston, this is Dana Holgerson's 3rd year, but is it really his 3rd year? I mean, the first season, was really crazy with all the opt-outs, with De'Aaron King opting out and other players opting out as well. And then last season, of course, with COVID and everything, that had all the cancellations, just crazy. So, I agree with a lot of people that this is going to be really Dana Holgerson's first year with, having a full off season and having a full season with the Cougars. Now, they did go 3-5 last year, 3-3 in the conference. The recruiting is not looking good. I mean, it's in the bottom half of the American Conference right now for the 2021 class. The offensive side of the ball last year averaged 409 yards per game, about 143 on the ground, and a little over 260 through the air. The good thing is they do have 9 starters coming back this year, including Clayton Tune. The junior quarterback, out of 285 passes, he completed 170 last year for a little over 2,000 yards, 15 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. Now, those 10 interceptions, is pretty gross. It's definitely need to fix that this year. And Tune actually finished 2nd rushing on the team with 253 yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. Now, what's going to happen, though, is if Tune, knock on wood, if you're a Houston fan, but hopefully he doesn't get hurt. But if he does get hurt, I mean, this team's going to be in trouble because there is not much experience at all behind him. Now, running back wise, they lose their top guy, Kyle Porter. Kyle Porter had over 424 yards and 4 touchdowns last year. So you lose that production. Mobakar, he's back. He had 52 carries for just under 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. But he does have over 1,400 yards in his career at UH. They do add a P5 transfer from Texas Tech, Tayson Henry. And we'll get into that about Texas Tech later because Houston does play Texas Tech this season. And he is not the only transfer from Texas Tech that is going to Houston. The wide receiver, they bring back Nathaniel Dale. He had 29 catches for 428 yards and 3 touchdowns last year. They do lose Keith Corbin and Marquez Stevenson, and those were two of the top guys out of that receiving corps last year. But they do bring in some P5 transfers. They bring in another Texas Tech transfer, Keyshawn Carter. from Texas Tech, and Jalen Irwin from UCLA. They also bring in an ODU transfer, Jake Herslow. Tight end, Christian Trahan. He's back, the junior. He had 22 catches last year for just under 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. Wide receiver unit as a whole, it's kind of a question mark for this offense. Just we need to see something out of this unit this year, and somebody's got to get him the ball. So Tune is going to have to definitely cut back on those interceptions and just try to get this wide receiver group the ball. And I mean, they have talent. You see the P5 transfers, you see the guys coming back. So we'll just have to see on that unit. The offensive line, they lose Braylon Jones, but they do add a very key transfer from Conference USA team, Louisiana Tech, Cody Russey, who was first team All Conference USA last year. And they add a Texas Tech transfer, Will Farr. So yet again, another Texas Tech transfer for the Cougs. Now, 8 of the offensive linemen do have starting experience. So hopefully this group can show some improvement this season, but we'll just have to see with that unit as well. On the defensive side of the ball, they gave up 399 yards per game last year, 168 on the ground and 231 through the air. They actually bring back 9 guys on the defensive side of the ball, same numbers they do on the offensive side of the ball. But the defense is going to be the strength of this Houston team, especially on that defensive line. They're going to wreak havoc again up front again this year. They had 24 sacks last year, so just a very disruptive in the backfield all season long. They do, unfortunately, lose Peyton Turner, their defensive end, and the backup, Taurus Payne. But they add another Power 5 transfer from Iowa State, Latrell Bankston. And spring reports actually said that defensive tackle Logan Hall had a great spring practice, so look for big things out of him. Defensive line coach Brian Early will have, he's going to have his best group he's had, and the most experienced group for sure. So they're going to expect them to be very disruptive up front again this year. And the linebacker group, they lose their top guy, first team AAC, Grant Stewart, who was their leading tackler last year with 61 tackles. But 6 guys do return that have some starting experience in that group. Deontay Anderson, the senior, had 26 tackles last year. He's back. Donovan Mutant and Giovanni Stewart are back as well. So they should be solid at the linebacker position as well. In the secondary, they get 9 guys back in that unit. They only lose backup Jordan Moore, and they add another Texas Tech transfer, Alex Hogan. So let's talk about that schedule. Now,
wait, is anyone left from Texas Tech? I'm just asking.
Exactly. And guess who they play in Houston, the opening game of the season? Texas Tech. So that is going to be very interesting. Not only because, hey, it's a P5 team coming. They're not going to play at Houston's home stadium, but they are going to play in Houston. So it's going to be interesting to see if Houston can get that P5 win over Texas Tech. Now, guys, you remember a few years ago when they beat Oklahoma to open the season in Houston. So it can be done. And let's face it, Texas Tech is not Oklahoma. This is a P5 team that you should have a decent shot at beating. I mean, hell, Houston Baptist almost beat them last year. So definitely hope that we can get a hashtag P5, G5 over P5 victory this year in the opening season with Houston beating Texas Tech. Now, when you look at the schedule after Texas Tech, they go to Rice, and then the next week they have Grambling at home. So, I mean, not a terrible non-conference at all. I mean, especially if they can get that first win in the week 1 against Texas Tech. I mean, realistically, they can go, 3-0 to start the season, which would be huge for Dana Holgerson and that program to just get a good start and, get things going. Because, I mean, when they hired Dana Holgerson, they had high expectations from him coming from West Virginia. And I know we, talked last week about Major Applewhite. So, I mean, they got rid of him to get Holgerson. It's for this program to take the next step. So high expectations. And, this is Holgerson's 3rd year, but I'll give him a pass the first couple of years. This is his really first normal season, at least.
Oh, I agree. And plus, they get Memphis at home. They get SMU at home. They don't play Cincy in the regular season. It's, right. I think it's probably his best shot since he's been there to have at least get to the championship game.
Yes. And, I mean, now for the conference schedule, the tough stretch for me, at least analyzing the schedule, is definitely going to be early October 1st going to Tulsa, and then that Friday night, and then going October 7th, going to New Orleans to take on Tulane. So, I mean, those are winnable games for sure, but and looking too, that Tulsa game is coming right after a Navy game. So if they can get through that 3-game stretch and come out at least getting 2 out of those 3, I mean, this is going to be a really good year for Houston. You look at the over-under listed by ESPN, they actually have Houston at 8 wins, and I'm actually going to go over those 8 wins. I like this Houston team. I think they can do some things in this conference, and they can actually maybe even contend for the conference championship. I'm not saying they're going to, but they could be towards the top at least as the season gets to a close. And also their other non-conference game is at UConn, so that should be a win to close the year. So now looking at the recruiting rankings, I mean, you're Houston and you're recruiting in the bottom half of the league. Like, it's just so
in that state, like that should be unfathomable. Yes,
they've got facilities, money. Like, they should be doing better. So Holgerson, they're going to have to do better on the recruiting front for sure.
And I mean, they've got famous alumni there that can really help contribute. They've got Andre Ware. He's on ESPN. Nas been there. Like, you can bring in guys like that to help you with your recruiting. Why not at this point?
And you have a name. I mean, Houston has an established brand, and it's not like it's just an up and coming school. They should have no trouble getting recruits in there.
And it's an attractive city as well.
It is. Yeah.
Granted, when it rains, like the whole city floods, which would turn me off right there because the traffic would be a nightmare. But
too soon. I have one more thing to point out about Houston, too. I just want to check in on this one real quick, boys. But here's a quick question for you first. What is your thought, and I'm getting to a point here, but what is your thought on the Wildcat quarterback situation? Are you a fan of it?
I mean, I just feel like most defenses have caught on to that now. Like, I don't, at first when they did it, a few years ago, it was cool and it was very effective. Now, it still can be very effective if you've got a 5-star guy back there. But as far as nowadays, I feel like defenses have caught on.
I agree with that too. Like, I feel like if you have a once in a generation type of talent that, say you have a 4-year starter at quarterback that you don't want to replace with this talent, and you want to find a way to work him into the game plan, I think it could be a good change up in certain situations, but I wouldn't say it's something that should be widely adopted.
Reason why I ask, they also picked up another transfer that I was reading about, Seth Green, that came over from Minnesota. The guy's listed on their 2 deep right now as a backup tight end, but he also happened to be the Wildcat quarterback for the Gophers while he was up in Minnesota.
Oh.
When he was in Minnesota, listen to this. His career numbers, 114 rushes for 388 yards and 15 touchdowns over 3 seasons rushing. Additionally, 6 of 7 passes completed for 57 yards and 3 more touchdowns, 1 interception. But hey, that's some productivity in the Wildcat offense right there. So I'm not saying that they're going to throw that in there, but it could be something to watch for.
Oh, and Holgerson would totally be the person that would do that too. I mean, he's always that's something to watch out for. That's pretty cool. All right, now is it time to go walking in Memphis?
It is.
Walking in Memphis.
John, stick with your day job there, buddy. I'm just kidding.
They don't call him Elton John for nothing.
Hey, I hate Memphis. What are you talking about?
No. All right. I'm just going to leave that there and continue. All right, Memphis last year finished 8-3, which, in my opinion, by all accounts, was a pretty successful season considering the
all things considered.
All things considered, given the opt-outs they had and the transfers they had, injuries that they had. To me, that was a pretty successful season. This year they returned 16 starters. They do lose their career passing leader, Brady White, at quarterback. They did bring in a couple of transfers. Peter Parrish from LSU, Grant Gunnell from Arizona, who did start 7 times at Arizona. I think Gunnell's going to get the nod there. He's 6'6". He resembles that Brady White, Paxton Lynch kind of mold. So he definitely is going to have the advantage. And, I'm not saying he's going to live up to, Brady White and Paxton Lynch, but he's got a good foundation to build on. Their offense as a whole last year did take a step back. They went from scoring like 40 points a game in 2019 to 31 points a game in 2020. Had 453 yards a game, 145 rush, a little over 300 passing. I do definitely see their offense getting more on track this year if they can get consistent play out of their quarterback, out of Gunnell. In the running game, so Rodriguez Clark does return. They do lose Kenneth Gainwell. He opted out last year. He was a transfer, or he moved over from wide receiver to running back in 2019. Had 1,459 yards, 6.3 yards a rush, while adding 610 yards receiving. So that is going to be a big loss for them, even though they got used to not playing with him last year. But he is going to be gone. They do get Colin Watkins and Asa Martin. They do return. Overall, I think this is going to be a more experienced kind of running group. They do have some depth there, so I think they'll be able to rotate some guys in and out. Moving down to the receivers, they do lose their number 2 receiver in Taj Washington to USC. He was a freshman All-American, transferred to USC. But they do return their top 4 of 6 receivers, including Calvin Austin. He was their number 1 receiver last year. The only thing that concerns me about this group of receivers is they don't go very deep. There's not a lot of experience there. So I would be, that's one area of concern, especially with a new quarterback, breaking in a new quarterback. That could be something that, to kind of keep an eye on when you don't have that much depth at receiver. You do lose that freshman All-American to USC. So, like I said, something to keep an eye on. You do lose Kenneth Gainwell, who was a kind of a dual kind of guy, receiving and rushing. So, yeah, like I said, something to keep their eye on. Offensive line, they lose 2 starters, includes center Emmanuel Orana Lopez and Obina Ez, left tackle. They do return a 3-year starter in Dylan Parham. They do get 3 transfers in: Devontae Dobbs from Michigan State, Austin Myers from TCU, and Jacory Robinson from Cincy, which is interesting to note. But this unit as a whole, they do have 104 career starts back. They have, like I said, pretty good depth at running back. So I definitely see them trying to maybe lean a little bit more on the run game this year with this offensive line, the running backs, and considering the issues, or not really issues, but concerns at receiver and quarterback.
Hey, real quick, Josh, too.
Yeah.
Jacory Robinson, too, Cincinnati guy. 24 games started for the Bearcats.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huge
thing to note there. So, do you know more about why he left Cincinnati? To be honest, I don't know that much about it.
Personally, I don't. Do you, John?
I do not.
Yeah. So I would assume maybe he either got beat out there, or maybe something personal going on where he just wanted to get back closer to home. Maybe he lives around the area. Hard to say.
Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on.
But it's interesting for sure.
Yeah, definitely interesting. Moving over to the defensive side of the ball. So last year they held opponents 27.9 points, 400 yards total offense, or total defense. They held opponents about 145 yards a game on the ground, 289 yards in the air. With what they had coming back on defense this year, I see that production being about the same. On the defensive line, they do lose Joseph Dorcius and first-team all-conference nose tackle O'Brien Goodson. They do return Morris Joseph at defensive end. He was a third-team All-American. He had 7 sacks last year. Not third-team All-American, All-American Conference. Sorry, I need to specify that. But overall, I think this is a pretty solid defensive line for what they got coming back. And McIntyre's second year as defensive coordinator. And linebackers, so this is probably the strength of this defensive unit. So they return all starters. They have 8 guys with starting experience. This includes J.J. Russell, Thomas Pickens, Rodney Owens. I think this really has a shot to be one of the best linebacking cores in the conference. So definitely a strength. And again, in McIntyre's second year, maybe something there, a little bit more complexity into his defense with this experience coming back at linebacker. Defensive backs, they do lose T.J. Carter and John Broussard. Leandre Thomas returns. He did opt out last year. They have 7 guys back with starting experience. They, including another transfer this one's from Mississippi State, Julian Barnett. They also have Quindell Johnson back, which is a huge player for them. Overall, like I said, I feel like the defense is going to have pretty similar production to what they had last year, probably holding their opponents, I say, probably in the upper 20s per game. And, I think a lot for this team really depends on the consistency of play they get from that quarterback position, hopefully build some depth on the wide receiver core. But I definitely do see them relying on that run game with that offensive line. So looking at the schedule, so they actually avoid Cincinnati in the regular season this year. They do have to play at UCF. They do play at Houston. Out of conference, they got Nichols. They have Arkansas State at Arkansas State, which could be not. I don't know. It could be a toss up to me. They do have Mississippi State at home, which would be cool to have. Mississippi State coming to their stadium, an SEC team, and they do have UTSA. Let's see. They have SMU at home, ECU at home, Tulane at home, Navy at home. So. I really think based on the schedule, they have a good shot at getting to the title game. Like I said, it really all depends on that consistency they get on the offensive side of the ball. I think the defense is going to stay pretty solid. They also did bring in the highest rated class of their history, number 54 class overall last year. So I think this program in Silverfield's second year is kind of is heading in the right direction. So, expect good things from them. ESPN's over-under is at 8 games. I think that's pretty close. I'm going to go over, though, at 9 games. I really do think they'll get good play out of Grant Gunnell at quarterback, and I think they have a really good shot at making it to the championship game.
Yeah, and I know I said some not so nice things about Memphis earlier, but I might say some nice things at the end of the episode when we go over our sleepers for the conference.
Oh,
so I'll leave it at that. For those that don't know, I'm a big UAB fan, so that's why.
What?
Yeah, right. So Memphis fans, if you're just now tuning in, you know why I said those things earlier. So. All right, well, I will take us down to Annapolis for the Navy midshipmen. Last year, a very just weird year. I mean, that's a common theme. You kind of do need to kind of just throw out the 2020 season, but just did not get off to a good start for Ken Niumatalolo at Navy.
I'm glad you can say his name because I can't.
Well, it's a lot of practice. But this is going to be his 14th season at Navy. They do have a very tough schedule this year. In fact, a pretty brutal schedule. And we'll go over that later. On the offensive side of the ball last year, just not good. Averaged 275 per game, 177 on the ground, and just 97 through the air. It's Navy, so they're running the option, so they're not going to pass a lot. So that shouldn't concern you. The quarterback position, Xavier Arline, he was the youngest quarterback ever to start at Navy last year. Last 2 games against Tulsa and Army. This is a very young quarterback group. He's going to get some. Arline's going to get some competition from some guys there, including Maynor. But really getting those guys just a full off season is going to help just this young group just get more practice in and get just more comfortable with the system. At the running back position, Navy, they just didn't get the ball. They couldn't run the ball last year. And that's just so weird to see a Navy team not be able to run the ball. They lose their top two rushers from last year, Nelson Smith and Jamal Carruthers, but they also lose Miles Fells and C.J. Williams. The top guy is probably going to be between Isaac Russ and James Harris. So expect those guys to get the bulk of the carries this year. At the wide receiver position, I mean, with the triple option, they're really just, they're going to catch some passes, but they're really, Niumatalolo needs them to be able to block well. But they do bring back their leading wide receiver from last year, Michael Cooper, 12 catches for 199 yards and 2 touchdowns last year. Also bring back Mark Walker, their second leading wide receiver, that 13 catches for 175 yards. They lose Ron Mitchell and Devin Matthews, and also bringing back really Cooper and Walker is going to help this group get better, because that's just another year, that these guys will be able to contribute. Now the offensive line, they lose some guys this year. They lose first team right guard Peter Nestrowitz, left tackle Justin Self, right tackle Billy Honecker, and his backup Sean Rattay. Last year, as I mentioned earlier, the rushing numbers were just terrible, 177 yards per game, and they even gave up 23 sacks. So just terrible offensive line play last year. So hopefully, with the full offseason, they'll be able to just get things more productive this year on the running game, and they're going to need it with this schedule. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, last year they gave up 385 yards per game, 204 on the ground and 180 through the air. Now, Niumatalolo, for those that don't know, chose on the very short offseason that Navy did have, they actually chose to go contactless due to the COVID restrictions. He decided just to go contactless, and that definitely showed that first game against BYU, and they lost 55-3. They actually gave up over 445 yards per game through their first 7 games. But they did show some improvement on the last 3 games, where they only gave up 246 yards per game, and they played, a lot better. They really should have beat Memphis, losing just 10-7, and they played Tulsa tough, and of course they ended the season against Army. But they did show improvement, which is good to see. Now the stats look really good for the secondary and in their pass coverage last year. In fact, they were ranked 10th nationally in giving pass yards per game. But the reason why those numbers look so good is because teams pretty much just ran at will against them, and that's why the rushing numbers, they were actually ranked 100th nationally in rush yards per game. So definitely need to improve on that. But as I just mentioned, they showed some improvement even on that towards the end of the year. They do bring back 9 starters this year on defense. So just having that returning experience should help them play a lot better this year, and having a full offseason. The defensive line, 3 starters are back this year, and it looks like they're going to go to more of a 4-man front led by nose guard Donald Bernard. They do lose their defensive end, Jackson Perkins, defensive tackle Toby Okafor, and a couple backups, but they should be good on the D-line. Linebacker, led by second team all AAC Diego Fago. Guys, crazy good. He actually the leading tackle on the team last year, 72 tackles and 3 sacks and 8 tackles for loss last year. John Marshall returns again. He had 62 tackles last year. They only lose Austin Talbert Loving and Tommy Lawley, but they should be good again with Diego coming back in the linebacker, so they should be good and strong there. In the secondary, they lose cornerback Cameron Kinley and safety Evan Faught, man. I hope I pronounced that right. But they do bring back 6 guys that at least started the game last year, so bring back some experience. The secondary, again, with the triple option team, you don't get to see a lot of good passing reps in practice. Most of the time, you're going against the offense that they're wanting to get their triple option offense sets ready and to go. So I don't know. We'll see. Hope to see some improvement in the secondary this year for Navy. Now, the schedule, it's brutal, as I mentioned earlier. They open the season against Marshall on September 4th. Then they have Air Force September 11th. And then you got to look at their conference schedule. They do have to play Cincinnati. They do have to play UCF. They go to Houston. They go to Tulsa. Non-conference, of course, as I mentioned, Air Force. They're going to play Army. They play Notre Dame like usual. So this is a really tough schedule, guys. In fact, the ESPN over-under is 3.5. And guys, if you listened a couple years ago when we did our American preview back for the 2019 season, I'm pretty sure there was a low over-under that year for Navy, and I think I went under. And, of course, they proved me wrong by going 11-2 that year. So I'm actually going to pick them to go under the 3.5 this year, which is hard to say, but I'm sure Navy will prove me wrong like they did a couple years ago. So,
I hate it. I really like Navy.
Me too.
But that schedule's just brutal. I just don't know how you can get through that.
It is.
Option teams are weird in the sense that, like, one year, though, they can just be down, and the next year they've just got it clicking, and, like, no one can stop them. And that's, like, I feel like that's why you get seasons like he had, like you were saying a couple of years ago, where people thought they were going to be down, and then they just ran off a bunch of wins. I mean, you could see it, but it's a tough schedule. There's no doubt about it.
Yes, and the good thing, about a triple option team is that, a lot of teams that lose a lot of their guys up front on the offensive line, like for a triple option team, all you're doing is cut block. Well, I mean, you're doing more than cut blocking, but for the majority of the time, it is just cut blocking. So even though they lose a couple guys up front, it's not as like a dire need to replace them, even though they were all conference. Like you can the next guys will be ready to get in there and just cut block just like normal, like they're used to. So, but it will be really good for Navy just to get a full regular, they had a good spring, get just a good fall camp in. I'm sure they won't go contactless this time.
No, that was a huge mistake. And like you said, it showed. I mean, it seems like such a small thing, but it's not. It has a huge effect.
Yeah, they definitely got exposed for sure.
And no one wants to see the academies down. So, get it back
going. Definitely.
All right. So are we going to Dallas next?
Yes.
So let's go look at the SMU Mustangs coming off a 7-3 season last year, going into Sonny Dykes' 4th year at SMU. Sonny Dykes is one of those guys that surprised me. After California, I kind of thought, maybe he's done, but he's coming here and kind of turn the ship around for SMU. So overall, they have 18 starters coming back. They do bring in a new defensive coordinator in Jim Leavitt, he's most famously known probably for his stint at USF when he had head coach, late 90s, I think, early 2000s. He recently had that same role at FAU. Let's see. So looking at their offensive production last year, they scored 38.6 points per game, 495 yards total offense, 177 of that on the ground, about 318 through the air. Big thing to note, as with my other team in Memphis, they do lose Shane Buechele, their super productive quarterback, and they also lose their backup Terrence Gibson. They do bring in Oklahoma transfer Tanner Mordecai, who will probably definitely get the start. But they also do bring in this freshman, Preston Stone, very highly touted. I think he was like in the top 15 of his position group. He chose SMU over Texas, so that's a big get for SMU. So this quarterback room, they have talent. They just don't have experience. But I think if you're a quarterback and you got, at least recruited by OU and went there, I mean, you have some talent. So I think Tanner Mordecai will maybe turn some heads this year, especially when you get to this wide receiver group, which we'll get to in a second. Going next to the running back room. So TJ McDaniel, he's back healthy. He was out after week 4 last year. Ulysses Bentley is back as well. They also get a transfer in from North Texas, Trey Siggers. This is, I think, one of the top units in the conference in terms of running backs. Just between the experience and the depth they have at this position, I think it's going to be a pretty solid room. Moving to
And real quick, Josh, on the running back with Trey Siggers going from North Texas to SMU, like folks don't like outside. Now, if you're a North Texas fan listening, or SMU fan, but that's a pretty big rivalry right there between SMU and North Texas. So it was really interesting to see him leave North Texas to go to a rival at SMU. But
absolutely, yeah,
cross town.
Yep.
Moving next to receivers, previously mentioned. Now they do lose first team All-American Conference tight end Colin Granson, and they do lose tight end Judah Bell and receiver Tyler Page. But they do add another Oklahoma transfer in tight end Grant forgive me for mispronouncing this, Calcaterra. He was first team Big 12 in 2018. He transfers in. They do return Reggie Robertson. He was injured in 19 and 20. Some injury concerns there. Can he stay healthy? But they do return 3 of 4 of their top receivers, including Danny Gray and Rashee Rice. Like I said, I think this is going to be a really good wide receiver room, really good group. I think it'll be good for the quarterbacks to have a receiving group like this. And hopefully, like I said, I think it will allow Tanner Mordecai to have a pretty good season. Now shifting over to defense. So last year, statistically, they, had one of their better defensive seasons they've had in the last probably 5-6 years. They held teams to 30.9 points, 422 yards, 180 of that on the ground, 242 of that in the air. Held passers, so less than 60% at 58.1%. So defensively, on the defensive line, they returned 7 defensive linemen that had at least a start last year. They do, under Jim Leavitt, they moved to a new 3-4 scheme. So they do have some players that will be transitioning to that outside linebacker spot because of this new scheme. I think Gary Wiley, Turner Locks, Nelson Paul, just to name a few, will be transferring over to that or moving over to that outside linebacker spot. And regarding linebackers, they do lose Richard McBride, but Richard Moore is back. He was injured in 19 and 20, but I think he's pretty close to being fully healthy. And then they also, Kiki Burns moves from wide receiver to outside linebacker. So in this new scheme, linebackers are very critical. And being an Alabama fan myself, and who runs a 3-4 scheme, it's kind of the crux of that defense. Defensive backs. So they also return 5 backs with at least 2 starts. They had a transfer from Florida, Jahari Rogers. They do return Chance Cromartie and safety, Chevin Cavalier. So defensive back wise, I think they'll have another solid group here. I think with the experience they have back on the defensive side of the ball, I could see them improving from their numbers, which statistically, like I said, last year is one of the best years they've had in the last, 4, 5, 6 years. Moving over to their schedule. So they have a pretty tough stretch towards the end of the season. They play at Houston, at Memphis, get UCF at home, at Cincy, then in Tulsa. Out of conference, they get Abilene Christian to start the year. That's a win. They get North Texas at home. Then they have to go to Louisiana Tech at TCU. So I see SMU getting off. They in the past couple of years getting off to 5-0 starts and starting off the season really well. It's all going to come down to those last 5 games of the season. That's really going to define what kind of season they're going to have. And I think the over-under on this team from ESPN is 6, but I really do like this team. I do like, I think it really helps that when you have breaking in a new quarterback, when you have a running back room like you have, and possibly one of the best in the conference, and you have, talented wide receivers. So, I see them going over that 6 number. I see them winning 7 or 8 games. Maybe if a couple of things break their way, maybe pushing for that championship game. But guys, kind of curious to see what you think.
Yeah, I like over 6 as well. I mean, you just hit on the non-conference schedule, North Texas, which we kind of hit on earlier, but also going to Louisiana Tech. And we'll get into Louisiana Tech next week, actually, with our Conference USA preview. they're kind of down. So,
Yeah.
I'm not. If I'm a SMU fan, I'm not really concerned about either one of those games. Like you said, if they can somehow beat TCU, which they've done before, in Fort Worth, then I mean they very well could start off 5-0, 6-0, really. And it's just going to come down to, like you mentioned, that UCF and at Cincinnati, and then Tulsa. That last 3 games, or really 4, because before the UCF they got to go to Memphis. So
and to Houston before that, yeah.
Yeah. So the second half of the schedule is a lot harder than the first half. So
they could start
7-0.
They easily could start 7-0 if they beat TCU there. But I think that TCU Louisiana Tech back-to-back there, both on the road. That's going to be a tough little stretch for them there. But if they do start 7-0, if you go that far and you look at it as the last 5 games of the season, kind of control your fate at that point. I mean, you break it down and say, okay, if we just go, have a winning record at the end of this, we're 10-2, and 10-2 is a pretty darn good record, and you have a good shot at making a conference championship game if you go 10-2.
Absolutely. And something else too. So they have the bye week right before they go into that stretch, and they play Tulane on a Thursday before they play Houston. So they have a couple extra days to prepare for Houston. So, something to keep in mind. And also, I just think when that TCU game, Battle for the Iron Skillet, it's probably one of the coolest names. I love that.
Yes. Definitely. And look at the recruiting for SMU too. I mean, they are recruiting their asses off.
Yeah,
they're doing really
stealing players from Texas. I mean,
yes,
it's huge. And
Stone, that quarterback, he was a 4-star recruit.
Yeah, he's a very highly touted guy. So I think that could be one of those situations. Tanner Mordecai gets the start, but I mean, you got Preston Stone. He has a good camp and is right there neck and neck with him. Would not be surprised if his playing time increases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and by the way, on top of that, even their third quarterback, he's a Georgia transfer. So I'm not saying he was starting at Georgia, but I mean, there's talent there in that room.
Oh, absolutely.
And those Dallas helmets, I just want to talk real quick about that. I think those are probably one of the coolest helmets in the G5 for sure.
Oh, for sure. I absolutely love those things. All right. So I think next we have the
Temple Owls.
Temple Owls. Sorry. Yeah. Again, I should probably learn my ABCs. So, Temple, not like SMU, not coming off the greatest year. They went 1-6 last year. Struggled a little bit. Couldn't really get anything going. They do return 14 starters. And sorry, as I'm pulling up my notes here. So they returned 14 starters, struggled mightily on the offensive side of the ball. They had 19.9 points a game, only 348 yards of offense, 140 on the ground, 208 in the air. Really just could not get anything going. There was like a musical chair of quarterbacks. I think 6 quarterbacks played last year. Once Anthony Russo went down last year, I felt like those backups kept dropping like flies, and to eventually they got to a walk-on quarterback, 5'11" walk-on quarterback. This year, so they do lose Russo. They lose Trad Beatty. They do return Real Mitchell and that walk-on Kamal Leary. But they expect freshman DeJuan Mathis to get the starting job for Temple Owls at quarterback. Hopefully he can provide a little spark for them. I think they're pretty high on him. They like him. He had one start last year, but I think he should show significant improvement this year.
And speaking of, Georgia transfer quarterbacks, we got another one here with him. So.
Another one. I think he started Georgia's first game last year.
Yes, against Arkansas.
Arkansas, and so again,
crazy.
Georgia just can't keep quarterbacks, but that's another show.
Hey.
So moving on to running backs, they return Iverson Clement and They add Ravon Bonner. He was number 2 rusher at Illinois in 2019. The Alverson Clement comes from University of Florida. They do lose Ramon Davis to the portal just after 4 games last year. Overall, they do have a trio of backs. They have plenty of talent to work with on the running back room. Is always good when breaking in new quarterbacks. I feel like I've been saying that a lot this show. And the receiving room, so they lose Brandon Mack and tight end Aaron Jarman. They do add Purdue transfer Ahmad Anderson to, kind of fill the void. They return Jaden Blue and Randall Jones. Very solid unit again to help out a new quarterback. Offensive line. So last year, again, I think they only started the same line once. They had like 9 different players that started on the offensive line. So musical chair with quarterbacks, musical chair with offensive line. Definitely shows in their offensive performance last year. They could not get anything going. They do return 6 guys that, had some kind of starting experience, but everybody in that room seems like they have starting experience. So, let's move on to the defensive side of the ball. So last year gave up 37.1 points per game, 433 yards, 209 rushing yards per game they gave up, and 224 through the air they gave up. Not very good numbers for the Temple Owls. Defensive line, they lose second team All-American Conference Arnold Ebike, I can't pronounce his last name. Ebike. They lose Daniel Archibald. They lose a couple other guys on that defensive line. They do add a transfer, Willie Rogers from Washington State. They add a guy from Kentucky, and 2 guys from North Carolina. So they brought in some transfers to kind of, fill the void left by those people that left from the defensive line. The linebackers, though, they only lose a backup. And they get back a couple of guys from injury that they lost last year. Should be a much improved unit. Like I said, they only lose that one backup. A lot of experience coming back, so they should be pretty good on that one. Defensive backs, so they lose Christian Baswell and Linwood Crump. They had a transfer from UConn, Keyshawn Paul. They had a transfer from West Virginia, and they add another one from Northwestern. The guy from Northwestern, Cameron Ruiz, he started 15 games in 2 years at Northwestern. Northwestern's always had a pretty solid defense, so he's a pretty good guy that should come in and hopefully contribute there. Moving to the schedule. So they do have UCF, Houston, and Memphis at home. They do play at Cincy. At a conference, they start out at Rutgers, at Akron. They have Boston College and Wagner. But, over under for this team is 3. I see them right at that number at 3. I think it's going to be another struggle year for the Temple Owls and for Rod Carey, his 3rd year here. And just, hopefully they can – I think if they can get consistent play again – from a quarterback and not play musical chairs and, use the same offensive line, I think, at least they can win more than one game this year, but maybe hopefully they get headed in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. I was about to say, how do we feel about Rod Carey? I mean, coming from Northern Illinois, he had that program really, really well, left it in a really good shape. Last year, as Josh, you just mentioned, was terrible. I had thought the year before in 2019 they weren't that great, but they were actually 8-5, so they had a pretty good year. They just got the doors blown out bad in the Military Bowl in 2019, where North Carolina beat them 55-13. So ended the year pretty ugly. So that's probably why I was thinking that the 2019 season wasn't as great. But I mean, do y'all think Carey is feeling a little pressure based off of last year's results, or do you think most Temple fans are probably just thinking it's a wash last year because of the whole COVID stuff?
I if you'd asked me, 3 months ago, I would have said it's a wash. But hearing a lot of these people, I mean, there's a lot of people that are putting weight on how teams played last year, and we've said it, for a while. I think the COVID year, the year of COVID, the football season during COVID really shows how good of a coach you are. and given the adversity that all those players faced. And, I don't think he's in a good spot right now, to be honest. I don't. I mean, he did have a good year in 2019, but, I mean, it was such a drastic drop off last year. And just, I know he dealt with some injuries, especially at quarterback. And I think for that reason, you may be giving some leeway given that, he played 6 quarterbacks last year and they all just kept dropping like flies. So, but I think his seat is definitely hotter this year.
I think that a lot of people are quick to, and rightfully so, but they're quick to give pause to the COVID season and say, hey, it's okay, just write this year off. But at the same time, you look at it and fans have expectations. They want to see their teams win. Those same fans are the ones that are donating money to the schools, that are keeping the athletic budgets afloat, and they get frustrated when their teams kind of start trending downward. And to me, that's what you're seeing with Temple here. You've got a team that was, doing decent a few years back, and it's like each year they're kind of creeping downward and just getting worse and worse. And that's a bad sign for a coach. You really want to flip that script this year. And I think if he doesn't do that, then he really is going to be on the hot seat. If I'm a Temple fan, that's at least the way I would feel.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. Absolutely. And they can do that. I mean, they can do that. They get Memphis at home. Even if you don't beat Memphis, if you play them close, I mean, show some kind of progress to get back to what you were in 2019.
Definitely. And I mean, you look, they weren't even competitive in some of those games last year. Like you look at, losing to East Carolina 28-3, UCF 38-13, SMU 47-23, Tulane 38-3. Yeah, just
they weren't even competitive.
Yeah, I mean, I know COVID really tore that program up last year, but I mean, COVID affected everybody. So
it tore up the programs that they lost to as well, and obviously they still prepared better than you. So
and that's my thing, and that's why I've always said, like, I felt like COVID really, brings to light how good of a coach you are.
Definitely.
Because there's so much adversity you have to get your team through that, you're going to find out. Can you prepare a team through this or can you not? So I think it really opened some eyes.
Definitely.
All right. Well, I guess we get to keep hearing my lovely voice and my poor grammar. Let's go on and go to the Tulane Green Wave. Let's go down to Nolens, Louisiana. Tulane coming off a 6-6 year. And this will be Willie Fritz's 6th year here at Tulane. They do bring in a new offensive coordinator, Chip Long. He was at Tennessee last year. He's also famously at Notre Dame. And then you also got Chris Hampton assuming the defensive coordinator role. Last year, he's a DB coach at Duke. Before that, he was at Tulane as well. We'll see. Looking offensively, so last year they were scoring 34, almost 35 points a game. They had 394 yards of total offense, 217 of that on the ground, 177 of that passing. They do return Michael Pratt. Last year he threw for 1,800 yards, 20 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. So there really ain't going to be any competition at quarterback. They are going to have competition at the backup. Kai Horton coming in at back, freshman, battling Justin Abida for the backup position. Running backs last year, so that running back room ran for a total of 2,200 yards last year. They do lose second-team All-American Conference They do lose second-team All-American Stefan Hutterson. See, again, can't speak English. And Amari Jones. They do return Tajay Spears, who got injured early on last year, and guys, in 9 quarters he ran for 274 yards. That guy was lighting it on fire before he got injured. They do return Cameron Carroll, who's a 230-pound running back that can run a 4.40. So that guy's got some speed. They do bring in Devin Brumfield from Utah, so they have a strong three-man rotation to bolster that strong Tulane running game. So I continue to see them rely heavily on that. Looking at the wide receivers, they only lose Jacob Robinson. He only had 5 catches last year, so it's really not that big of a loss. They return their top 6 receivers, including the Nat Twins, who I think have the coolest name. So let's see. So the Nat Twins, I think one's named Phat, Phat. I think that's a cool name.
Nice.
Yeah, I know. They do add a transfer from McNeese State, Siren Sutton, first team all conference. Offensive line, they lose one guy, but they do have 114 starts back, including Sincere Hainsworth and Corey Dublin. So it's going to be a strong offensive line this year. Have a lot of experience coming back. And hopefully, again, with that experience, running back room hopefully should open up some more holes, increase their running yards. Defensively, last year they gave up 28 points per game, 422 yards total, 143 on the ground, 279 through the air. So they did have some heavy losses on that defensive line group. They lose Patrick Johnson, who was an all-conference player, second-team all-conference player, Cameron Sample, first-team all-conference player, and DeAndre Williams. They add a transfer from Memphis. I love these interconference transfers that we've been noting today. I had Memphis transfer Joseph Dorcius. He had 15 and a half sacks in 4 years. They do return Jeff Johnson at nose tackle, so they have that experience there. But heavy loss on that defensive line front, kind of an area for concern, I would say. They do return their entire linebacker unit, so that's one thing that kind of can help fill in the inexperience of the new defensive line group. And then that defensive backfield, so they lose their safety and Chase Quertion, and they lose cornerback Willie Lingham. They do add Lance Robinson from Kansas State, and Colorado transferred Darian Rakestraw. Jalen Monroe returns, probably one of the best players in the country, I think, at his position. Really strong player. They should have improved, performance from these guys in the defensive backfield. But again, hopefully, the linebackers in this defensive backfield group can overcome that loss in the defensive line group. Kind of looking at the schedule, so they play at SMU, at UCF, at Memphis. Tough out of conference schedule. Start off the year at Oklahoma, but Oklahoma's at home. Morgan State, and they go to Ole Miss, and they have that UAB at home, which should probably be a win. Ain't that right, John? And then they go to ECU and have Houston at home. But they do get Cincy at home. But, it's a tough schedule. And it was tough out of conference. I think the over-under is 5. I see them coming in, but 4 or 5. If they get one upset at 6, but I think it's going to be another kind of 5-7, 6-6 year for Tulane.
Yeah, I mean they should definitely be at least Morgan State, their FCS opponents. But
yeah.
that non-conference is just so brutal. Like you get to open the year, at home. It's going to be awesome to see OU coming into Yeoman, but you got to start off against Oklahoma, then you got to go to Ole Miss, then you got to face UAB, who's going to be one of the top teams out of Conference USA this year. That's just brutal. But I say that if they can make it through that without any injuries, I do like them to pick up a few wins in conference play too. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I'd say the goal would be try to make a bowl, but even that's going to be tough this year with that schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me ask you this: what do y'all think of Willie Fritz? 6th year. So let's see. Last year they went 6-6. The year before that, 7-6. 7-6 before that, 5-7.
He's done a great job with the Tulane program, just taking them, where they are now. I do know a lot of Green Wave fans are wanting him to take that next step. I do not think this year is going to be the year for them to take that next step. Especially, as Josh, you just mentioned, not having a really good defensive line. In the last couple of years, Tulane's had some mean guys up front, that on the defensive line. This year, they really don't have that, and they don't have the depth. But I know that Willie Fritz, reports have come out that he was a finalist for the Kansas job. So, I mean, if you're a Tulane fan, to be honest, you're just happy that you still have Willie Fritz right now and just hope that in the next couple of years that he can take that next step.
And that's what I was getting at. Like, they've been really consistent under his tenure, and like, when is that next step coming? Like, I know they're waiting for it. When's it coming? But this year's definitely not the year.
It's one thing to have expectations, but you've got to make sure that you're realistic about looking at your schedule and saying, okay, can we beat these teams? Like, or are we just looking for a number? Like, just because we're looking for 10 wins doesn't mean we're going to reel that off if we're facing teams who are, considerably better than us. So, and I mean, you hate to say that about any team, but as a fan, you've got to look in the face or look in the mirror and say, okay, we can win some ball games, but we're probably not going to win 10 ball games this year. So move to next year and say, all right, what can we do against that schedule? But at least in the meantime for this schedule, look for him to maybe try to get an upset. That should be your goal. Make a bowl, get 1 or 2 upsets, call it a good season.
And guys, if they can somehow get that Oklahoma, I'm not speaking it into existence, but I'm just saying, hey, maybe OU's looking ahead. So if they can get that, then
they'll carry Fritz right on down to Bourbon Street if they do that.
Yeah,
they'll carry him down to Bourbon Street. Hey, and one more quick thing. We'll get in this in our Conference USA preview next week. But, old OC at Tulane, Will Hall, now the Southern Miss head coach. So very curious to see how, the Tulane offense looks this year under Chip Long. So it'll be definitely interesting to see how the Green Wave do this year. But I'm right around
both coordinators there too. So
yeah. So it's going to be interesting to watch. Now I'll take us down to Oklahoma. Speaking of Oklahoma, I'll take us down to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I know a couple teams ago we were, hitting on Rod Carey and the Temple Owls about how COVID, really just messed their season up. Well, speaking of one of those teams that kind of took advantage of the COVID year, Tulsa, I mean, having a great year last year, 6-3, getting to the conference championship, but losing to Cincinnati. I mean, just, having a really good year. Philip Montgomery, this is going to be his 7th year at Tulsa. And honestly, guys, he was on the hot seat. He had a couple losing records, 2-10, 3-9, and 4-8 before 6-3 last year. So just a really good job by Philip Montgomery and his coaching staff last year for Tulsa, going a perfect 6-0 in league in conference play in the season. As I mentioned, they lost to Cincinnati in the title game, 27-24. They lost to Mississippi State in the Armed Forces Bowl. If you guys don't remember that game, that was the crazy fight at the end of the game where they were like kicking each other. Mississippi State players running around kicking them in the head, and so it was crazy. It's crazy. But you look at recruiting, and honestly, the season last year really hasn't helped Tulsa in recruiting. Right now, they are dead last in the 2021 class, recruiting class right now. Now, on the offensive side of the ball, they averaged 410 yards per game last year, about 158 on the ground and 252 through the air. They do return 10 starters back on offense. Now, they do lose their quarterback, Zach Smith, who threw for over 1,900 yards last year, but he was interception prone. He threw 10 interceptions last year to only 13 touchdowns. And, I mean, he really didn't have a good end of the year passing. When you look at when they played Cincinnati and Mississippi State, now, granted, those two teams really good on the defensive side of the ball, but just did not look good. Davis Brin, the sophomore, he's Phil Steele and also Athlon, they like him to get the start at quarterback. He only had 29 pass attempts last year, but he completed 19 of those 29 for 268 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. So, I mean, but we haven't seen much at all out of him. So, we'll definitely look to see how he looks in a full season as QB1. But, I mean, he's got some guys behind him, too, like Carson Collins, redshirt freshman, Roman Fuller. So, he'll have some competition for sure. Now, at the running back position, they do lose Corey Taylor and T.K. Wilkerson. Now, Shamari Brooks tore his ACL before last season started, But Golden Hurricane fans, be happy that he is back, and hopefully, all things are pointed to him being healthy and ready to go. And he actually just needs 1,218 rushing yards to become the new career rush leader at Tulsa. Now, Deneric Prince, he's also back. The sophomore, he had 88 rush attempts last year for 475 yards and 4 touchdowns. And, they also add a Southern Miss transfer, Steven Anderson, to the running back group. And they also bring back Christian Lovick. So just a solid group. The running back is definitely not a question mark for this offense. In fact, that's going to be one of the strengths of this team is the running back group. Just need the quarterback play to just show up this year, and they're going to expect a lot out of Brand. But in the wide receiver group, they returned their entire unit for this year, so this is great. Keelan Stokes had 46 catches for 644 yards and 3 touchdowns. J.C. Santana's back. He caught over 34 catches for 544 yards. Josh Johnson is back, had 6 touchdowns last year. They add Kansas transfer Ezra Naylor. So, this wide receiver group, you guys know, you're listening. This is going to be one of the best wide receiver groups in the American Conference. But, again, somebody needs to get the ball to them. So they're going to definitely look for the quarterback position, whether it be Brand or someone else, to be able to get the ball to them. Now, offensive line, also bring the entire unit back this year. Right tackle Gadlin opted out last year, so he didn't play, but he's back this year. They add Oklahoma State transfer Bryce Bray, and I believe Phil Steele stated that, this is going to be one of the most experienced offensive lines, not only in the conference, but in the country. So expect big things out of the offensive line. So really speaking on the offensive side of the ball, everything looks good for Tulsa except for the quarterback. So if they can just get that position shored up, they'll be fine. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, last year they gave up just 330 yards per game, just a really great defensive effort all year by the defense. Just 143 on the ground per game and 190 yards passing per game for last year. They bring back 8 starters this year on the defensive side of the ball. In fact, Athlon has a stat that I really loved. It says that opponents gain 10 yards or more only 108 times out of the 638 plays versus the Tulsa defense. So that's about almost 17% rate, and that's the second best in the American Conference. So really awesome. The defensive line, entire group is going to be back on the defensive line. So you bring back your whole offensive line and you bring back your entire defensive line. Jackson Player, just always in the opposing backfields. He had 37 tackles last year, 3 sacks, and 5 quarterback hurries. Tyree Stevenson, he's back. They add a transfer from Eastern Kentucky, Elijah Taylor. So, the defensive line is going to be great again, just like the offensive line. And in fact, this defensive line is going to be right up there kind of with Cincinnati for the best in the American Conference. So definitely look to see who gets that crown. The linebacker, they lose their Nagurski and American Defensive Player of the Year winner, Zaven Collins at linebacker. He had a great year. He was drafted in the first round by the Arizona Cardinals. 53 tackles, 4 sacks, and 4 interceptions. Second team All-American, All-Conference, Justin Wright. He's back. He had 62 tackles and 7.5 tackles for loss last year. Johannes Burnett, he should be healthy and hopefully can be able to play again this year and contribute. He actually, he tore his ACL last year, unfortunately. Also on the linebacker, they add Oklahoma transfer John Michael Terry. So adding some P5 transfer there. Now in the secondary, Tulsa does lose their safety Lamar Mullins and starting cornerbacks Allie Green, and I can never say his name. Akeelee Evans. I don't
Welcome
know
to my world.
Yeah, but the guy's a stud, so he's playing in the pros now. But the defensive back unit only had 1 interception last year. So, great defensive effort last year, but they got to find a way to just force some more turnovers and get some more interceptions this year. But definitely look to see some improvement there. And, Kendra Ray, strong safety and free safety, Martin, this very talented safeties there for Tulsa. They're back. So you look overall at Tulsa. Again, I mentioned earlier, the biggest thing is if they can get just some good quarterback play, a consistent quarterback play from Bren or someone else, they can perform well, and do well. The schedule is tough. As I mentioned, non-conference, you got to go to Oklahoma State. You got to go to Ohio State, and then you got Arkansas State at home. So very tough, very tough. And in conference play, you got to go to Cincinnati, to Tulane, to SMU. They do get Memphis at home, but just a very tough schedule. Now, I believe the over-under ESPN set, let me see, was 6.5. And guys, I mean, y'all might disagree with me, but I'm actually going to go under that 6.5. I think this is going to kind of bring Tulsa back to, I see them going at 6-6, 5-7, 6-6. I think this will be a step back for Philip Montgomery coming on. And I hate to see that after last year's, 2020 6-3 season, but I see them taking a step back this year for sure. I mean, if they can find a way, they're definitely going to lose to Ohio State and Oklahoma State. They'll beat UC Davis, but just having to go to Cincinnati, to SMU, it's just tough. I mean, if they can somehow get 6-6 and make it to a bowl game, that'll be a successful year for them, I think.
Do you think the biggest factor in them falling off is that schedule, or what do you think it is?
It's the schedule. I mean, you open against UC Davis, you should win that, but 2 brutal games in a row on the road, Oklahoma State and Ohio State. And, Arkansas State's not a pushover, even though they have a new coach, Butch Jones in the Sun Belt. You guys should go back and listen to our Arkansas State preview from last week. But it's just going to be tough, man. I mean, and you schedule Memphis for homecoming. Yeah, good luck with that.
Right.
I mean, if you're scheduling somebody for homecoming, I'm trying to schedule like Temple or somebody. But I don't know, guys. We'll definitely see. But I definitely see them taking a step back this year. All right. And I believe we've got the Florida schools left, UCF and USF.
And y'all thought y'all were done with hearing my voice. Well, I haven't talked since ECU. I haven't broken down a team in so long, but I'm back. So I start this with a question for you gentlemen. Do you have your tickets?
My tickets?
Because
Boise State? Yeah.
No. The Gus bus is leaving the station from Tulsa, Oklahoma, where we just were, and we're heading to Orlando, Florida, sunny Orlando, Florida, to check in on the UCF Knights. And you better get on board. That's all
I'm just upset that Gus and Disney World's in the same city because I love Disney World so much and hate Gus so much. Like, it's just such a conflict for me.
Hey, but you say that, Josh, but guys, you're going to need to listen really quickly, or listen very attentively and very quietly as I'm about to say this. I think UCF upgraded their head coach.
I don't think you're wrong.
I don't think you're wrong, unfortunately.
I agree.
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, you go back to I'll let Baker talk. Baker, you hadn't spoken in so long. I'll let you talk.
Hey, listen, be my guest. You're good.
I just think with hype, I mean, the recruiting was trending in the wrong direction for UCF. UCF fans were, I mean, they were trying to give them away. And when Tennessee finally hired the athletic director from UCF, it was almost just a package deal, that he was going to leave to go to Tennessee. And you just look at like UCF, they're already recruiting a lot better with Gus Malzahn. You get a offensive mind, should be an offensive, or I still think he's an offensive genius. I mean, I know Josh might have different opinions, and I know if there are any Auburn fans, they were happy Malzahn left. So I don't know. I do think out of everything, UCF got the upgrade, especially at the head coach position.
Well, hey, listen, it's a fresh start for everyone involved. It's a fresh start for Auburn. It's a fresh start for UCF, and I think it's welcome on both sides. So, we'll see what happens, but let's break them down here and give you a little bit of a look into the world of the Knights down there and see what we got going. So, first and foremost, I'll say, they're returning 8 starters on that offense there. And listen, that offense is, and always really has been, at least in the recent years, a prolific offense. It was the number one offense in the American last year, number 2 in the nation. So, I mean, again, out of this world. They average, really just a ton of yards, honestly. They had the number 1 pass offense in the conference, number 4 nationally, the number 3 rushing offense in the conference. They're led by 4 all-conference performers. You got first-team all-conference wide receiver Jalen Robinson and Cole Schneider's on first team there. Second team all-conference quarterback Dylan Gabriel. A lot of you folks will recognize that name. Look, Gabriel's been a stud there for some time at this point, and he's really one of those guys that you recognize all over the country, no matter where you are. They've even got a third team guy, center Matt Lee. So you've really got a lot of guys there that are representing for that offense on the preseason athlon, all conference, which says right there to you, okay, we've got some studs. Let's look at it a little closer. What can we do? So Dylan Gabriel, he's a guy returning from last year, passed for 3,570 yards, 32 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions. I mean, look, the guy's efficient. He gets yards. He puts it up. You can't beat that. Their top 2 rushers did graduate, but all eyes are now turning to senior Bentavious Thompson and 2 transfers that they got in the running back position, and that's Mark Anthony Richards from Auburn and Isaiah Bowser from Northwestern, who are both expected to compete for a decent amount of playing time. So we'll see who's really going to take on the lead spot there, but I think they've definitely got talent in that running back position still, so should still be productive all around. UCF also lost their top receiving threat last year, but still expect Jalen Robinson, who I said was a first-team all-conference guy, to go ahead and continue contributing. Also, they've got transfer Brandon Johnson from Tennessee and transfer Nate Craig Myers from Auburn. Those guys should play big roles. One theme you're going to already see here is that just like we had a while ago where it was Texas Tech transfers everywhere, we've got Auburn guys coming here. But, I mean, as you would expect, Gus is coming from Auburn. A lot of those guys, look, that says something about the coach. They like the coach. They're transferring there to go play for that coach. So there you go. Continuing on here, taking a look at their defense, they're definitely not returning a lot there. Just returning 3 starters on the defense. So really not a lot of experience depth-wise there. So that's something to really pay close attention to. With that said, could be a good thing because the defense wasn't that great in 2020, so they could really use some fresh turnover there. The defense ranked 11th in the American Conference this past year, and again, there are only 11 teams in the conference, so they were dead last. They were the 7th ranked rushing defense in the conference and the 11th ranked passing defense. So as good as they were passing on offense, terrible with their pass defense. So something's got to give there. 8th ranked scoring defense overall. Again, let's hope that they can improve all of that a little bit. The defense is led by 2 all-conference performers on the preseason athlon team there. Look, number 1, you've all probably heard the name by now. This is the biggest transfer that they got. Big Cat Bryant, another guy from Auburn. Big Cat Bryant was huge at Auburn. I mean, a great contributor, and he transferred out after Gus left and was originally planning to head to Tennessee, but when Tennessee fired Pruitt, he said, all right, well, I'm not going to go there. Was looking pretty hard at Oklahoma, figured out there were going to be a lot of boundaries to get himself there. So he said, hey, I love Gus. I'm following Gus because that's the reason I left in the first place. And here he is. He's a guy that was an all-conference performer in the SEC, and now he's on board with UCF. And I think he's going to contribute, and I could very well see him at the end of the season as a first-team all-conference guy. So I think it's one of those guys who will see his stock continue to increase there. You've also got third-team preseason all-conference defensive lineman Kalia Davis. So both of those guys should be studs up front for them. and I see a lot of contribution from them. Preseason guy, Kalia Davis, that I mentioned just now, he actually also opted out last year. So he's coming back after a year off, which could be helpful for him. So hopefully he picks right up where he left off. And I think a lot of folks expect to see that. As far as additional transfers that they have on the defense, they got safety Divad Wilson from UGA, and yes, it's not David, it's Divaad. So Divad is how I'm pronouncing it. You go with what you want to say. They also got nickel Jaden Francois from Nebraska, and former freshman All-American defensive lineman Ricky Barber Jr. from Western Kentucky. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, John. I know being a UAB fan, but apparently that guy was quite the stud there at Western Kentucky. Their top sack producer, Tremont Morris Brash, also returns, which is, again, a plus for them to see a guy like that coming back. The Knights do hope to see more consistency out of their linebacking core this year. Last year, they felt like at times they had something there, but just as much as they would peak, they would see those guys really let back up, and it was really an up and down season for them. So they hope to get a little bit more consistency out of them. As far as special teams go, do want to point out punter Andrew Osteen is preseason second team all conference. So, that can always help them with pinning the other team back there. In my opinion, I think, like I said a while ago, and again, like John really said, I really think that UCF upgraded. Heupel and Co. had watched their win total really take a downward spiral majority of the time. It felt like while they were there, they just never were able to continue that, what do I call it? I guess dynasty, if you will, that was going on beforehand. Look, I know Frost wasn't everything. I know that Heupel, I believe, had the undefeated season, but I mean, look at where they are now. Things have just started going downward. So I think it'll be a good change. Like I said a while ago, I think that it was a good change for Auburn, but also UCF. And I think that you'll see that show up here very soon. As far as their schedule goes, non-conference schedule, they've got Boise, Bethune-Cookman, Louisville, and UConn. You look at that and you say, Boise and UCF. Now, isn't that something? Because that's two of the heavyweights in the G5.
Let's go.
The next few years. I mean, that's going to be like one of those dream matchups. It really is. So let's look at that and see, okay, what do we think in that game? It's hard to say because you've got a team that's got, like I said, a lot going on here with UCF. But at the same time, I mean, look, they've got a lot of talent, and Boise's been good. So, I mean, it's going to be a real clash, and I think a real treat. So I would definitely recommend tuning in for that. Bethune-Cookman should be an easy win. Louisville could be tricky, maybe not. I'm not sure. But, hey, look, UCF has got a good track record against P5 teams. So let's hope for a W there. And then, hey, another old American matchup here against UConn. Should be a dub, should be a win. So, I mean, hey, I think you're looking easily at least 2-2 there. Could be 3-1, could be 4-0. So you never know. And then aside from that, I mean, you look at the conference games. They go to Navy. I mean, look, the option's tough, but I think they'll be prepped for that one. You've got ECU at home. Mid-season split, you've got to go to Cincinnati. I mean, that's a huge one. And then the following week, you've got Memphis down in Orlando, also a tough one. But listen, I mean, it's all going to depend on what you do those 2 weeks, how the rest of the season's going to go. You screw up there, your momentum towards a conference championship's pretty toasted at that point. If you win those, I mean, look, you're in a good spot. After that, you go down to Temple. I mean, that should be a win. You've got Tulane, SMU, UConn, USF. I mean, look, SMU's not an easy out, but those other ones definitely are winnable. So, look, I think it could be a big year for UCF. They've got a lot going on, but I do like the talent they've brought in. I look at the over-under. It's 9.5, set the bar with ESPN. I'm going to go over that and say that they get 10 wins. With that said, I could see it being 9, but listen, I think it's going to be 9 or 10 for them. I think 9.5 was a really good number that ESPN set. in my opinion. So, looking for a big year out of the Knights. What do you guys think?
Definitely agree with you, Baker. I think Knight Nation will be proud. I like them over that 9.5. The only, I don't even want to say like definite loss, but the two toughest games are going to be, October 16th at Cincinnati, and of course before that September 17th at Louisville. But the way Louisville is just kind of trending down right now, I kind of like UCF's chances in that. Going up against former App State coach Scott Satterfield, but just the Louisville program just kind of trending down right now with Satterfield. And if that, like you mentioned earlier, that Boise State game is going to be a hell of a matchup. You've got two first-year coaches at their programs with Avalos at Boise State and Malzahn at UCF. So that's going to be very interesting to see. For a first game, a high-profile game like that between two of the best G5 teams. I mean, that's going to be a hell of a matchup. But if they can find a way to beat Boise State, I like them going over that 9.5 for sure. But even if they lose to Cincinnati, Mike can get a rematch at the end of the year in the championship game. So we'll have to see what happens for sure.
I mean, you really do you never know. And honestly, listen, one more thing I want to point out just off of something you said a second ago. Give it up for all these guys that are scheduling matchups with like top tier G5 teams.
Yes.
Listen, I mean, the Boise's versus UCF's. Look, Marshall's going out there being aggressive. App State's going out there being aggressive. UAB, all these top tier G5 teams, they're not just settling. They're giving us what we want to see as fans. And, you got to appreciate that. You really do.
Definitely.
One thing I want to mention, just being familiar with Gus Malzahn, and he does pull Gus Malzahn like things, that ECU game, that sandwich between that Navy and Cincy game, could be a potential upset. Auburn when he got lost to Tennessee that year. I mean, there's always these games that he should win that he doesn't. Just throwing it out there, but we'll see.
Well, I can tell you for certain they're definitely not going to lose to UConn.
Oh yeah. Half the team can show up and they still win.
Yeah, and that's yeah.
Josh says the Knights should be on upset alert. That's all we know. That's
all we know.
Yeah.
That will be said.
It could be UConn. You never know.
Oh, no. The rivalry game with UConn? No.
Big time rivalry there.
Well, all right, Baker. I think we got one more team. I think it's the South Florida Bulls, USF. You want to talk to us about the Bulls down in Tampa?
Man, I'm ready to roll with the Bulls down in Tampa here. Jeff Scott took over that program right before COVID. How do you like that, stepping into your first season as the COVID year? Not many guys had that luxury of an opportunity. So
you got to give them a wash. I mean, I know it seems kind of weird for me not to give Temple a pass, but to give South Florida a pass. But for his first year as a head coach, come from Clemson, you kind of got to give it a wash.
You have to. In this situation, you have to.
I said this a while ago. I don't really condone that mentality very often. But I agree, in this situation, that was a really tough spot to say, hey, your very first year, let's hop into this. Let's have all these cancellations. Let's have a really weird off season. And oh, by the way, let's cancel some of your games and go out here and play when we're really uncertain every week if you're going to even be healthy enough to play or if the other team's going to be healthy enough for that matter. So what a fun time. But hey, lo and behold, it was a rough year. We'll talk about it. Returning 9 starters from the offense, that team went 1-8. Again, not a good record, but it can be improved upon. It was the 9th best offense in the American in 2020, 8th best rushing offense, 8th best passing offense, 9th best scoring offense. So really a lot of consistency there, and the fact that they just really weren't that great. But, hey, we can only go up. The offense is led by 2 preseason all-conference performers in second-team offensive lineman Donovan Jennings and third-team offensive lineman Demetrius Harris on an O-line that returns all 5 starters. So truth be told, that could be a good thing, the fact that you've got 2 preseason all-conference type guys on there, and you've got that experience already, that could be a continued improvement process where you see those guys stepping up and you see that offense starting to flourish a little bit this year. They're looking to find some quarterback stability this year. UNC transfer Cade Fortin, Miami transfer Jaron Williams, and true freshman Timmy McClain all look to compete this year for the starting job. No clear cut necessarily right now from what I can see as far as who the favorite is. A receiving core that returns dependable threat Bryce Miller looks to be improved heading out of spring practice. So, can't guarantee you how far of an improvement we're going to see, but I definitely think that there is some potential for them to get better, which is a plus. The Bulls will use 2 scat backs in Kelly Joyner and Darian Felix in the backfield. When they need power, they will, however, rely on Colorado transfer Jaron Mangum. As far as the defense goes, they're returning just 6 starters. It was the 9th-ranked defense in 2020 in the conference, 5th-ranked pass defense, 11th-ranked rush defense, 11th-ranked scoring defense as well. They're led by 13 preseason all-conference linebacker Antonio Greer. They're hoping that transfers Xander Yarborough from New Mexico State and Jamari Stewart from Mississippi State can become premier edge rushers, as they do need some more contribution off of that edge there. They have struggled with that lately. New members of the secondary via transfer will be Will Jones II from Kansas State, Christian Williams from Miami, Matthew Hill from Auburn, and TJ Robinson from Rutgers. Scott's hoping to find additional speed in the secondary right now. They definitely seemed a little sluggish at times last year, and they're really hoping they can try a lot of guys out to find that additional speed in hopes that they can maybe not get blasted, if you will, over the top, and that they'll be able to keep up. USF definitely has some clear gaps everywhere except the offensive line, but a lot of changes were made this offseason that should hopefully improve them as a team as a whole there. So look for them to be better. I'm not sure how far up the rankings they'll necessarily go, but they're definitely headed in the right direction. And like you said, it may take a couple of years when you do take into account that year 1 was a COVID year, and now it's time to really get the ball rolling and start moving in the right direction. When we look at the schedule there, the non-conference schedule, they've got NC State, Florida, BYU, and Florida A&M. They travel to NC State. They've got Florida and Florida A&M coming to Tampa, and they travel to BYU. So I think that really NC State, BYU, and Florida could all be pretty tough games. NC State wasn't great necessarily, and BYU, I know they did lose second overall pick Zach Wilson in the draft this past year, but still a lot of talent there generally. So maybe a tough non-conference schedule really for them. Aside from that, in conference, they travel to SMU. They host Tulsa and Temple. They go to ECU, host Houston and Cincinnati, and finish out the season at Tulane and at UCF. So it's one of those where you look at a lot of the premier teams and generally say, man, those are the tough games. Well, unfortunately for a team like this that's struggling, almost every game is going to be, a tough game, a dogfight, if not a blowout. So again, when I look at a team like that, I try to say, all right, generally you want to improve upon your win record. Shouldn't be terribly hard to do from a team that won 1 game last year. And you want to find yourself hopefully getting an upset or two. So, are there possibilities on the schedule? Absolutely there are. So we'll see what they can do. ESPN had the over-under at 3, which I actually think is a pretty good number for them. But if I had to do an over-under there, I would probably go under just because I do not have a lot of confidence in them, and I think it is going to take some time.
Yeah, I agree. The only definite win is the Florida A&M. I mean, they can beat BYU because, I mean, you know, like you said, BYU loses Wilson. They actually lost a lot of people from last year's team at BYU, but they do have a bunch of 30-year-olds, so you never know with BYU. But, yeah, I just see Florida A&M as a definite win. Maybe they can turn one or two of those conference games. Maybe Temple. Yeah, maybe Temple, but yeah, I like under 3 too. And Bull fans, you know, you have to realize this really is his first year, like his first full year, Jeff Scott. So you gotta give him another year.
It's a rebuilding job, and it's going to take some time.
Yeah, but how cool is it that Florida's coming to Tampa? Like, that's awesome.
That is cool.
And don't they have Alabama coming in a couple years too?
I believe
you're right there.
Yeah, so that's awesome. I mean, you know, Baker, you hit on earlier about all these, you know, G5 teams scheduling good games. I mean, look at USF, you know, doing these 2-for-1s and getting some good home games. So that's really awesome.
And here's another thing with that, too. I mean, you look at Florida and really, I mean, you look at Tampa with USF and say, okay, well, that's an attractive area. It's a big city. You can bring in a lot of these teams. Well, it's not like Florida's struggling to recruit Florida and they have to go play in Tampa, you know. So that is a big get. And it's not just like, hey, we're coming here to help our recruiting. No, you're not. You're already prime in that area. You're coming there because you wanted to come there. So, yeah, it's a huge get for them.
Definitely. Well, guys, we still have a couple more things we need to discuss. We each have sleepers for the American Conference? Does somebody want to start us off?
Go for it, Josh.
My sleeper is the ECU Pirates.
Ooh, that's one of mine as well.
Yeah, I really like what they're bringing back this year. It's Houston's third year of the program. Usually the big things happen in year 3. And I think they'll make their first bowl game in 7 years, and they return 10 guys. I really like, you know, how things stack up for them. And yeah, I think, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if they turn some heads this year. John, what about you?
Well, I have 2. ECU was one of my 2, and my second, I kind of alluded to earlier in the episode, but Memphis is my sleeper.
Okay.
It feels, and I'm not trying to slight Memphis fans by listing them as a sleeper. I could already hear some of them get mad at me right now for calling them a sleeping team when they were just in the Cotton Bowl not too long ago. But I think, you know, Memphis, they returned 16 starters. As long as the new quarterback can do well, this team, and get that run game going again. It was so weird seeing them not have a really good run game last year. If they can get that going, then I like Silverfield's chances of just contending for that top of the American Conference yet again. Baker, how about you? Who you got as your sleeper?
Hey, and real quick, too, to that point of Memphis, I mean, look, Athlon has them projected 6-6 overall, 3-5 in the AAC, 7th ranked in the AAC at the end of the year. So, I mean, look, if you're going to put them at 7th, I call that a sleeper. If you're saying for them to have that type of season, I mean, why not? So,
right.
Yeah, for me, I'm actually going with the Pony Express, SMU Mustang.
All right.
So, yeah, exactly. Got a little bit of a different one there. Look, they're not necessarily a bottom of the totem pole type of team, but Athlon has them ranked 5th in the preseason poll. I'm looking at them, and they're returning 9 of 11 players on the 2nd-ranked offense in the conference from 2020, and they have 3 capable athletes competing for that starting QB job, including that Oklahoma transfer and the 4-star freshman there that we talked about a while ago. So, in my opinion, I'm saying look at SMU for them to possibly push Cincinnati and UCF as some of those teams that you kind of maybe consider the top tier, and they may be looking at themselves in that conference championship game at the end of the year. It's hard to say, but I think there's a possibility.
Nice. Well, let's go ahead and give our American championship game who we think is going to go to the championship game. And I actually have a rematch of a contest that's going to happen during the season already. I've got Cincinnati and UCF in the championship game, and I've got Cincinnati beating UCF.
As you know, to not provide any texture, John, I'm right there with you. I have Cincinnati and UCF in the championship game with Cincinnati coming out on top. Shocker.
Good stuff.
Right.
Good stuff. I've got Temple and USF. Not just kidding. No. Sorry to all you Temple and USF fans. But hey, got to keep it lighthearted. So this year, man, I fought back and forth over this. I've got Cincinnati, and man, I'm going to go ahead and jump the gun and put SMU in there. I'm going to say Cincinnati and SMU.
Okay.
I never like to run chalk, and I feel pretty confident about SMU. I like something going on there. But I am going to look at it, and I'm going to go ahead and call Cincinnati on the win still. So, in a way, I think SMU has a Tulsa-esque year here, even though it's non-COVID times anymore. And the Pony Express rolls on. I think they start out 7-0 with that win over TCU. And that last 5 games of the year, I think, are going to be really huge, and I think they do just enough to get themselves into the conference championship.
I like it. I like it. Well, guys, thanks so much for listening to us again. Before I send it over to Josh to wrap it up, just please, help us spread the word. Tell a friend or two. Share us on a message board. Just retweet our episode on Twitter. You can follow us on Twitter at the G5Beat. But Josh, I'll turn it over to you, buddy.
Thank you, guys. Enjoyed the conversation tonight. Please join us next week as we go through our CUSAS Conference USA preview. It's will be a 3-hour conversation on just UAB, and as I expect. But yeah, as John said, please give us a like on Twitter or follow on Twitter. Tell your friends about us. If you have any suggestions, comments, please, let us know. But until next time, guys, we'll see you later.
I love you, Memphis.
Stay good.